case you're not quite sure what questions you have yet, we do thankfully have a few pre-prepared for you. I know that Phil is very passionate about first aid, and I can probably say something along the lines of, what do you think about the content about first aid in the current draft bill, Phil?
So the first draft bill was really a bit of an eye-opener on how much they were trying to whitewash a lot of subjects within the law. But the main thing that came across when it was bounced back by the Select Committee was their desire to include life-saving skills as a mandatory requirement under the law. I would have preferred if they'd actually turned around and said first aid, but life-saving skills does encompass a lot of things, because depending on the size of your venue, it does depend on the scope of what they're going to require. But as well as the skills, it's also about the equipment that's going to be necessary. And unfortunately, there's very little being said about that until the regulating body is being set up, which is not helpful at the moment.
Thank you, Phil. One of the things that we're very aware of is that the legislation hasn't yet been enacted. And we've got a note here, Andy, that you think it might still take a further 18 months. And should organisations be doing anything now?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. Yeah, it's true. The last note that came out from the committee, the last advisory, was they're looking to wait 18 to 24 months once the bill is actually written into law before it takes effect. So companies may think, well, it's a long way down the road, let's not worry about it just yet. And that actually is a big mistake. My speciality is crisis management, and it's well known in crisis management there's an effect known as myopia bias, to give its technical name. What it means is people tend to put unpleasant things off till later. So if you've got 18 months and you've got this big project, you tend to think, oh, well, we'll look at that next month or next quarter. And the next quarter comes and more things have happened which need immediate attention. We'll put that off till the next quarter. And so they carry on till all of a sudden they have no quarters left and they've still got to get things sorted out. These plans take time. So my advice is start now. You may not finish it, but at least start looking at it to give yourself, take advantage of the 18 to 24 months so you've got a proper plan when you do need it.
Thank you, Andy. And planning leads us very nicely on to talking about emergency planning. I know Alice has got a great deal of background in terms of the educational sector. So, Alice, how can schools plan? How can schools go about emergency planning and preparedness for Martin's Law?
So this is a really key question, Jodie. Thank you for asking it. So my background is working in schools. So I did anything from emergency planning, risk assessing, safeguarding people. And you have to consider so many key factors: how many people are working there, the children, how they'd react to an emergency. And the DFE, which is where we started the response solution, was with schools, they have a dedicated alarm system for evacuation. Whereas for evacuation, the DFE did stipulate they had to have a different sound for it. So they knew exactly what they were listening to and how to react to that sound. When you consider something like Martin's Law, you have so many different organisations that you have to deal with that are of different sizes. And as part of the way they respond, you need something like an alert system, which is where essentially we'd come into play. And with an alert system, you can broadcast any sound you like. You could broadcast a certain messaging. So if you had a public-facing entity and you think, well, my staff know how to respond because they've been trained on responding to this emergency, then they'd know to evacuate listening to that sound or come in if it's a lockdown. However, if you needed key zones, like for a secondary school further education, then you'd need to consider having different sounds that are for, say, evacuating to the library or going to a place to hide in a cafeteria. So they have to be dedicated spaces that will help keep people safe. And we all have the same response, don't we? Flight or fight response when it comes to these sorts of things, or we freeze up. So if we're given dedicated language to say this is what you need to do, we will keep more people safe, which is what it's all about.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Pleasure. Next, we're moving into the world of threat and vulnerability. And during the last talk, we were talking about hostile vehicle mitigation and how that's only going to be put in place if it's actually required. Ian, could you expand on that, please?
Certainly, Jodie, thank you. I think the key element to this is it's education, really, and understanding the specific threat and vulnerability to your space, your event, what you're trying to protect from. Without understanding the risk and the threat, doing something about it is quite ridiculous in some aspects, and over-egging the pudding sometimes as well can happen because you can't make risk-based informed decisions. So the actual key aspects of it from this whole Martin's Law piece that's obviously not set in stone yet, we don't fully know what it's going to mean for event spaces or stadia or crowded places, is engage with people now and understand what your threat, vulnerability and risk is. That's extremely cost effective to do that, and then you can make a risk-based informed decision, which is absolutely okay to do. That may lead to putting security measures in place. It may be that you've just taken the advice that you actually don't have to. So it's really critical to understand what you're dealing with, and that's important.
Fantastic, thank you. So obviously you're dealing with very physical, very obvious threats and vulnerabilities, very physical barriers. But Chris, you're much more in the world of cyber, things that people can't see, things that people don't even think about. Can you talk to us about how you prepare more for the threats and vulnerabilities in the cyber world, please, Chris?
Thank you, Jodie. I certainly can. Same as Ian here, threat vulnerability assessment is the key thing here. You know, most organisations are digital businesses nowadays, and the threats are real. The internet has brought us so many great benefits, but there are dark sides to this. And, you know, it's absolutely true. If we want to look at a venue, we want to look at the weak aspects of the venue. There's the physical aspects, but also the network that is used to provide the CCTV coverage, the network that's used to provide connectivity to the emergency services. All of these things could be weak links in an organisation and could be exposed. The other thing that we have is that large venues will have large supply chains, lots of smaller organisations that may well be weak points in the cybersecurity. So getting in there and understanding the weaknesses across the digital environment and actually beginning to plug those is important. And businesses should be doing this anyway, regardless of Martin's Law. But Martin's Law is an extra imperative from our perspective.
Thank you, Chris. So you've heard from our panellists some of the questions that they may or may not have known were coming. But do we have any questions from the audience?
Just talking about the preparation for the bill that's going to be passed, how can local authorities support local businesses and organisations to prepare for it in due time?
So who wants to take the question on public authorities?
Thank you. Yeah, I think the key is collaboration, you know, and whether that's hostile vehicle mitigation, cyber security, training and education, it's a case of collaboration and getting around the table and having an open door policy to discuss these things and what Martin's Law may bring in when we fully understand what that means. We work with a number of different authorities that hold events on undedicated event space as well as dedicated event space. You've got to be around the table, everybody's got to interact with each other. There'll be a different requirement from everybody around the table, but you've got to work together and collaborate. Early engagement's absolute key. And like was said, let's not wait 18, 24 months down the line till this is enforced, because even then from a monetary perspective, your budgets are another 12 months or 2 years ahead of that as well. Engage early. Early engagement doesn't cost anything, and people can get a better understanding of what's got to be reached and required.
I think I can add to that, Ian. I think we tend to find still in many organisations that data protection and the cyber guys are always very late to any discussion about a new product or service or anything else going on. And that's my great fear here, that the physical conversations will happen and at the last minute, at the 11th hour, just before the event is, oh, we're using some technology, that's way too late. And that early engagement is really, really vital.
Thank you. Any further questions? Would any of our panellists like to add anything?
We briefly touched on the current legislation and the proposed changes that they're made. And one of the proposals that they're talking about is the stripping out of mandatory training from the legislation. I personally feel, and I think most of our group feel that would be a grave mistake. One of the highlights of Martin's Law is the fact that we need to make spaces safer. It comes from the physical element, from the cyber element, and from the people-led element. And that means that people need to understand not just the law, but what to do in those situations. And that includes how to prepare for the eventuality, what to do during the event, and then what they can do afterwards. So obviously with first aid training coming in afterwards, but what to do during the event is a very simple program. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete. It's the NACSO training. It's free to anyone. It doesn't cost anyone anything to do, and people can take it off their own back and do that. But businesses are not embracing that, and it's the one key skill that is available now that's free of charge that anyone can do that would make a big impact on an event that may happen tomorrow. The unfortunate realisation is people that are out there to cause harm are not going to wait for us to be prepared. The next event could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen in 2 weeks' time. We don't know. So if there's skills out there now that people can learn, it's important that they are taking advantage of that and doing that and not waiting for a law that may or may not stipulate that they have to do that. We need to take personal accountability and a moral responsibility to make sure that companies are stepping forward and saying, we want our staff to provide a safe environment. Part of that is embracing the free training out there and making efforts to engage with companies like those sat around here to then look at the longer term training and equipment and procedures that will make a difference that may cost on their budgets.
Fantastic, thank you, Phil. And that was certainly the second time today that collectively we've promoted the free Action Counters Terrorism training by Protect UK, because it is out there, and as Phil said, it's a free resource available right now for free, and it does work through some competence-based questions, so it tests knowledge, it tests understanding, and will provide a certificate of completion.